9/11 marked the beginning of what would become the longest war in U.S. history. At the twilight of her 30-year career to the fleet, the claws of the venerable Tomcat would once again be unleashed.
We were fortunate enough to be crewed up together in VF 102, the Diamondbacks, when 9/11 went down, and we got deployed a week later on the USS Roosevelt, and we were again the single Tomcat squadron. And unfortunately, we had a lot of the newer innovations that were added to the Tomcat. We were flying the B, which had the bigger engines. We had some enhanced raw gear, went bigger and better. We had the Lantern FLIR pod, which was an excellent pod that allowed us to do some air-to-ground delivery. We can carry every kind of weapon, and we even were able to carry JDAM, but we mostly carried precision-guided bombs for our deployment. Had some extraordinary missions there early on with very few friendlies on the ground. We had a pretty liberal rules of engagement where if we saw contact with the enemy, we were pretty much cleared to engage them, which led to some really interesting missions.
We had some danger close radio traffic where we had some special forces guys on the ground that were actually being chased by a Taliban convoy. So sometimes the big machine can not be as flexible as you want to, but that day we all kind of worked together with the Air Force tanker, dragging us closer to the action, the AWACS, getting us permission to deviate from our assigned plan. Everybody, the Air Force, Navy, came together, and next thing we know, we're full afterburner heading to try to help the Special Forces guys on the ground. When we got there, it was convoluted because even though the rules of engagement were liberal, you still have to get a positive ID on the combatant versus the friendlies. And there, it was such a dynamic situation that we couldn't tell who was who. I mean, we assumed that the person being chased out front from our perspective was the Special Forces. However, we couldn't, they were pretty busy, and we couldn't get radio contact with them. Finally, when they got a spare moment, they radioed up, gave us positive identification on who they were and where the combatants were, and then our entire job was to stop the convoy. Hooked it there, stabilized, Scar's got the target, and then the gonculator, the computer's figuring it out, then all of a sudden we see time to release -3, -4, -5, and that's not what you want to see. Because we didn't have time, these guys were close to the Special Forces, we had to stop them. And then, not a practice maneuver. I don't think we'd ever done one before, but all of a sudden, a steeper approach is going to bring that counter down. So then it's just a full -G bunt, and then everything starts floating up in the cockpit. I see binoculars and some other stuff. I mean, we could go into that.
The Tomcat was not designed with any kind of bathroom facilities, so all we had for options was to hold it or carry these little bags that have like a dry powder that when you have to relieve yourself, it turns into kind of a jelly so it doesn't go flying all over the place, and it seals up. And Big Don had this habit of doing that every time we went flying. Whether, he drank a lot of water, stay hydrated, so the first thing off the cat usually as we're heading up to the tanker was, I'm going to go ahead and relieve myself. So he already done that. I think he even done it twice on this particular mission.
Usually right on join up and then right at tanking, like during the tanking evolution.
So now we get back to our mission where he goes -G forward, and what happens?
So then everything's floating up in the cockpit. I see binoculars kind of flying next to me and everything. And then all of a sudden we stabilize, and I think it was roughly a 45-degree dive. And all of a sudden I feel it's like a warm compress on my neck. So the piss bag, it was floating around, one of them had just like landed right on as we're doing our target run. Stabilize, think, wow, that's interesting. And then time to release, 1, 0, release. and luckily that one went high order, and the entire convoy was stopped, and the special forces ended up being okay. So that's definitely, without a doubt, my most memorable.
For a variety of reasons. But we were able to drop all of our bombs. We actually only had a 2-plane on that one, and what we had to do pretty much was, while one was tanking, we would be doing our work, and so we were the first ones to drop, while the other guys were going ahead and top off. By the time they came back, we dropped all of our bombs, and all we had at that point was bullets. Yeah. Which don't typically get used a whole lot. You know, there was no air-to-air threat, so at this point, that's the only thing we have. And this convoy was a really, you know, ragtag. There were a lot of civilian-type vehicles that were militarized. They had, you know, you've seen the pictures of we called them clown trucks. There were Toyota 4Runners, but in this 40 vehicle train, if you would, there was a tank, an actual military tank that was chugging along, and I remember all the dust coming from that thing. Well, when things started happening, you can imagine everything kind of dispersed. Well, that tank tried to sneak off, and it, of course, wasn't going really fast. So, this is the one time that we thought this is the time to use the bullets if we can. So we chased him down. Went down a little bit lower than we might have, should have, but at this point there was really minimal surface-to-air threat for us. So he got his dream of actually strafing a tank, a live tank, and not sure if you saw anything come up as far as direct hits, but it stopped.
Right. Yeah. We stopped the tank with the Mike. Yep. And it rolled in. So that was.
At that point, we have no bullets. We go get some gas. Our other aircraft had come back. He's doing great work. Again, both aircraft were FLIR capable. And what was great was the AWACS was just sending Hornets and from the both aircraft carriers that were there. And so all these Hornets were showing up, and they had the Nighthawk pod, which they didn't quite have the resolution of the Lantern pod. And the beauty was we were just overhead, and we had the targets, and so we ended up buddy lasing, where we were lasing from our aircraft. We had their code for their bombs. We'd put that code in, and we'd laze, and they'd actually drop their bombs, and we would laze for them, buddy lasing, and we did that a number of times. So while we only dropped 4 bombs that day, we actually facilitated the drop of, I don't remember how many, teens, I'm sure it was 15.
It was a lot. We lost count.
And we ended up, how many times did we tank that day? Probably.
It was 4 times.
4 times.
So,
and we landed probably 8.5 hours after we took off, and it felt like we'd been airborne for 30 minutes.
Yeah. That was an exciting mission.
It was a really good mission.
Please like and share if you find the video content interesting. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment below so as not to miss new upcoming videos. And see the entire film now streaming, or order the DVD online on our website, speedangelsproductions.com.